Well, greetings, citizens. How are you doing today? It's the end of the first week when I'm taping this. This will be for the second week. This will be on our geography section. And this is I figured I'd try a little bit of a new bit for that. I mean, I could have used an old tape, but I like doing something, I just want to do something a little bit fresh. I really don't have a lot to say on the papers that have been handed in so far because not that many have been handed in so far. So, there is a deadline of 11:55 on Sunday, and even though this first assignment is not graded, it is still expected, and it really will be beneficial to you to do so. Okay, so it's not even strongly encouraging. It is an assignment. Treat it like a real assignment, and then you'll learn from there what it is that I'm seeking for the rest of the semester. Okay, so moving on, today's topic will be the physical geography of Canada. There's a lot to cover in this because Canada is the second largest country in the world, and as such it has a number of various regions, as any country does, but when it's the second largest one, you have even more. And so I want to make that clear. I'm going to hopefully have a screen background behind me where you'll be able to see a map, and if that's not the case, there will be maps I'll provide online. But what I want to get today is I want you to think about geography. I know it's probably your second favorite topic, but geography is a very important element, especially when you're talking about a country like Canada, because geography, as it does in every country, it shapes what you can and what you cannot do. It shapes what kind of food you can grow, what kind of exports you may have, what kind of imports you may need because you can't grow certain things or certain things aren't available there. So, and it's true for every country, and Canada is no exception in that regard. So what I'm going to do is explain, have a little bit of a map here that I'll hold up periodically, but also hopefully there'll be a little map behind me as well. But as I reference certain things, you'll be able to hopefully associate it with both maps. Okay. First off, imagine 1491. There's actually a book about this by a gentleman by the name of Charles Mann. He did this about 12, 15 years ago. I think it was like 2005. He wrote a book called 1491, and it kind of described, attempted to describe what life was like here in the Americas, North America, Central America, South America, before Europeans arrived and started settling the place. Typically, growing up and through high school, we all have this, we've been taught various things throughout the years that most of them went along the lines like this, that before Europeans arrived, there wasn't a hell of a lot going on in North America. There were a few bands of Native Americans who basically roamed the land and hunted and gathered, and that's how they were able to survive. That's not even actually close to actually what was actually happening, at least what they're discovering now. Through anthropology and through all these digs, they're finding that native life was not nomadic. Native life was very stable, very agricultural, much more agricultural than they had believed. We've known for some time now that natives have had a system of democracy already in place on within their tribes and things of that nature. And they also had a matriarchal society because the women basically were running the show, for the most part, making sure that crops were grown and everything like that, while men were in fact hunting or men were in fact working in the fields, whatever they were doing. It was still a matriarchal society. So we're learning a lot over time, the thing is, as I'm saying this now, I'm sure that in 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road, someone else will be teaching this class and they'll be saying something maybe not entirely different, but somewhat different than the version I'm giving you. We're discovering new things all the time. And in fact, indigenous affairs, indigenous studies, native studies, anything along that line is a very big field to get into nowadays. If I was a young academic and I had an option to do things over again, I might well consider that, because people are interested in what has happened to natives, both here in the United States and especially in Canada. More so perhaps in Canada, because in Canada the natives are approximately, First Nations people as they're called there, are approximately 5% of the population. So it's a far greater percentage than they are here in the United States. And also they have, there's been an ongoing series of issues that have received a great deal of publicity over the last couple of decades. One of those is something called the residential school issue, and that was where the Canadian government, working with various religious authorities, the Catholic Church, some of the Protestant sects, would go in and they would take Native children from their parents in an attempt to help them assimilate into Canadian culture. They would take them away, basically strip them of their language and their culture and their heritage, and hope that things would turn out better. I expect things would be better for natives and for Canadians as well. It turns out it did not work for the natives at all. Being stripped of your culture, your language, strangely didn't help people. At some level, I'm sure, not trying to defend it because it's really not defensible. They must have thought they were doing a good thing back in the 1890s when they were thinking about this, but in retrospect, it was like, really? Really? You thought this was a good thing, huh? And of course, it was part of you can remember, late 19th century, early 20th century, there's huge eugenics movements, which means is we can make humans better. We can make humans better, and a lot of leaders, political leaders, social leaders, believed that this was possible. And of course, taken to an extreme, we saw things like, you start seeing genocides early in the 20th century. You see it in Armenia. You see, of course, during the Second World War, you see the Holocaust. So you see, this is a movement. We could better society if we did this, and we could change these people or eliminate these people, and so it was a thing, and it ran amok, and it didn't work out well. And even the thing is, you think, well, that was way back when. I'm sure they've gotten over that by now. The last residential school in Canada did not close until 1996. 1996. That wasn't that long ago. So this is something that Canadians are coming to grips with, and they're having a hard time doing it. The Canadian government's apologized for this, but is that enough? It's not for me to say. It's just that certain Native groups certainly feel that an apology is not quite sufficient for all the problems that these residential schools have created among the Native peoples. So, and that's an ongoing debate. But we'll get back a little. We're getting ahead of ourselves now. Right now, we're going back to geography. And all right, and so this is Canada. Well, it's actually much larger than that. But this is you see over here. This is the Canadian East Coast, Newfoundland, and the Maritime provinces in through here and whatnot. This is the area where, when European explorers first came over, now there's also some talk that maybe there might have been people who came from the West Coast. Again, 15, 20 years down the road, we're going to realize, oh yeah, there was a whole bunch of other people. Didn't you guys hear about this? It's like, what happened there? It's like, oh. But what we do know now, there were European explorers, and they came in the late 15th century. Actually, before that, we'll back it up a little bit further. In or around the year 1000, it is believed that Vikings, well, we have pretty solid evidence that Vikings arrived right on this very tip over here in what is we would call Newfoundland today. Just off the coast they arrived, put down the nets, and came up a bunch of fish, and some more, and some more. It's like, this is amazing, this is great, this is wonderful. The problem is the relations between them and the natives who were residing onshore, again, we're not there. It happened 1,000 years ago. We're doing the best we can to piece it together. It does not appear the relations were good. I mean, they tolerated each other at some level, but at other levels they did not. After a few decades of making trips over from, from the Scandinavian countries coming over to fish off the coast, they stopped coming. The Vikings stopped coming, and so they decided, yeah, this isn't worth it. And from what we know right now, it doesn't look like anyone else really attempted to come to this part of the world until the late 15th century. And of course, when people are coming here, they're coming here, but they're thinking they're going somewhere else. They're thinking that maybe this is if we head west from Europe, maybe we can find a shortcut to the Asian market, to Japan and China and that area. If we can just cut through here, because I got to telling you, from where we're going right now, going over land, getting on the water, going over more land, getting on the water, getting over, it's a real pain. There's got to be an easier way. So they started going west in hopes of finding that. And what they do find is the Americas. They find North, Central, South America. Of course, none are named that as such at that point in time. To them, it's land, and some of them think, "Hey, this actually looks nothing like China. No, not in the brochures. No, this isn't it." But the explorers came. They came from Spain and Portugal, and Great Britain got in the act, and France, and everybody got into the act eventually. But Spain and Portugal went down first. They ended up going to Central and South America, and they ran into the Incas, and they found gold. Oh boy! When the heads of state in Europe heard that, it's like, we got to get over there. By God, we got to get over there. Now. Gold, all the gold that you can eat. Yes. Well, so people came, and eventually they started coming to this part of North America. Of course, Columbus, 1492, with the first of his voyages. A gentleman by the name of John Cabot came, and he explored this area up through here into the Gulf of the St. Lawrence sort of area back in the late 1490s. Not much. Again, no settlements were put down. And then eventually you saw people like Jacques Cartier come from France in the 1530s. We'll discuss him more in the history section. But he made 3 voyages. And again, you go back to France and they say, yeah, what do they have? It's like, they got fish. Yeah, well, we knew that. What else do they have? Where's the gold? It's like, well, not everywhere has gold. We don't have gold here, do we? So, there's no gold, is there? It's like, no. He actually, on the 3rd voyage, he tried to convince people that there was gold, and it turned out to be fool's gold. So, that pretty much ended the funding for his voyages to North America. And actually, it killed the French desire to explore this part of the world for another 70 years. So they were disappointed by what they discovered there. There's fish. Yeah. There's a lot of they had encounters with the natives. They found out there's furs and stuff like that, and there's stuff like this to have, but on the grand scheme of things, it wasn't worth their while at that point in time, and so no one came back. Okay, so what is it that they have here? All right, when you come into Canada, the first thing you'll notice is Newfoundland is the most furthest east province. In fact, it's an hour and a half ahead of Eastern time. There's something called Atlantic time, which has provinces like Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and I think Prince Edward Rhode Island too, are all part of Atlantic time. So if it's say noon here, it's 1 o'clock there, okay? In Newfoundland, it's 1:30. So yeah, that whole half-hour thing, that kind of freaks me out a bit. But what do you find? Well, they call Newfoundland the Rock, and they call it the Rock because it's a rock, and there's not much you can grow on it. So it has very limited value in that sense. Only in recent years have they discovered offshore of Newfoundland that there is oil, black gold, if you will. All right. So it's like, well, now the thing is with oil prices going up and down, some of that's not as valuable as it once was. But, and also with climate change, there's a lot of people wondering what kind of future there is for oil. But that's another story for another day. But when people are coming here, Newfoundland's not a first stop or a place you want to set up shop because there's not much there. As in, like, yeah, there's fish here. You're going to eat fish, only so much. You're going to want other stuff with it. And the land was not hospitable for growing vegetables and things of that nature. So, in fact, as you move in, you discover that the entire maritime areas, all this maritime over here, the maritime provinces and things of that nature, they're not really, again, they're called the maritime provinces for a reason, because they're near the sea, and the sea is their life and their livelihood, which it turns out when people do come and settle here, it becomes a major export. Seafood does become a major export. The problem is, of course, you can't eat fish all the time. So it's only when you start seeing settlers come down the St. Lawrence River here, and down in this valley, that's where you first find that there is land that is suitable for growing food that people would need to survive. You can grow wheat along the St. Lawrence. In fact, that was a very major crop back in the day in that St. Lawrence lowlands area, was wheat, and you can grow corn there, and you can grow tomatoes, and you can grow, okay, so these would take root here. So, okay, this is something we can work with this. This is an area we can cultivate. And of course, that's where people would live, because that's where you could, sustain yourself. Because, the transportation system was, non-existent. So you had to pretty much sustain yourself. And so that's how that worked. Okay, so that's where, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes and stuff of that nature, that was a transportation system along the waterway. Otherwise, you're going through what they call this area right here. This region right up here, they call it the Canadian Shield. It takes up about half of the country. Goes from here, way up to the far north, all the way around Hudson's Bay, all the way up Quebec, all the way almost just north of the St. Lawrence area. This too is both a land of opportunity and a land of limitations. Most of the Canadian Shield, and again, like I said, is about half the size of the landmass of Canada. It is, again, rock and forests. And so it's like being in the Adirondacks, perpetual Adirondacks. Adirondacks, you have very wooded areas, some mountains in that area, maybe not as big, but it's very much rocky area. And areas that don't permit a sense that you can actually grow a lot of stuff there. You can't really grow anything here in terms of fruits or vegetables or wheat or things of that nature. It's just not going to happen. No, by the way, the climate for most of this, too damn cold. So this is not good for that. So it's like, well, why does anyone live there? Why would anyone choose to live there? Because, first off, it's a wooded area. Timber, lumber, yes. This is something people would like. This is something that Canadians can and have, I don't say exploited, but they've cut down swaths of forest, replaced them, of course, eventually, when they realized that Trees don't go on their own; they have to be planted. But they have huge forest industry, and lumber is a big industry in parts of Canada along the Canadian Shield, and also in British Columbia, which we'll get to later because that's on the west coast. But also along with the what do you call it? Oh yeah, the woods. Also underneath in the rock, they find that there's minerals there. It takes a while. It's not automatic, and you find most of this stuff is like a 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century discoveries are made, especially in places like northwestern Ontario, northeastern Quebec, which would become northeastern Ontario, northeastern Quebec. They would find out, oh, we have things like, we've got iron ore here, we have copper here, we have nickel, we have uranium. We also even have some gold. Some places in, like there's a place in Quebec called Val d'Or, Valley of Gold, where they actually did find a little bit of gold, but mostly they found stuff like copper and minerals along that line. So very important, minerals. Again, this is something that Canadians can and have exported to make to make a way for themselves in the world so they can get by. Okay, of course there's no food there, so that's something they would have to eventually build transportation to come up. Of course you have to have transportation to get the minerals out of that area onto a railroad car down to the St. Lawrence and shipped off, right? So that transportation has to be built, and so that's why it doesn't really take place until the late 19th, early 20th century, when railroads start coming in and things of that nature. Okay, so you start seeing that's why that happens through there. So we've got we've covered the East Coast in a sense, the maritime provinces, Newfoundland, the St. Lawrence lowlands. Then we've talked about the Canadian Shield, and then as you move further west, and you move, where am I going this way? No, wrong way. There we go. Go this way. Things start turning orange here. This is what they call the prairies. If you've ever heard of Little House on the Prairie, we have prairies in the U.S. We call them the Plains states. In Canada, they're called the prairies. And in the prairies, typically the main source of natural resource there has been grains, growing of wheat, barley, oats. Canada's been able to feed itself and feed many other nations because of that. Now, it took a while for this to all take place because, again, people go out there, then they had to start building out more of an elaborate transportation system, especially if you're trying to export this wheat. You have to, railroads have to come, you have to put, get this distribution center all organized, and then you can ship it off to around the world, okay? But I mean, that's something that draws people there eventually. This is something that doesn't really take place until the middle part of the later part of the 19th century, I guess, really. People start moving in, okay? Because, this is an opportunity for people. And also along the prairies, you'll find that you'll get the most severe weather in probably all of Canada. And I mean severe as in like extremes. It is extremely, extremely cold through there. Now it's going to be cold in the far north, but that's a given. But what happens is that cold air in the north will come down through here, and it cuts right through the prairies because there's no mountains really to block it. The Rockies are over here, so let's use actually sort of like a tunnel. So the cold air comes down, and Jesus, boy, does it ever get cold. In the prairies, it's typical to get like 30, 40, 50 below, without really working too hard. And that's still even true in the age of climate change. It still can get very bitterly cold. And what that does is it freezes the ground in the prairies. In places like south of a city called Winnipeg, which is in the province of Manitoba. There's a place called the Red River, and almost every year that Red River Valley floods because the ground is frozen so far, so deep, that when spring finally arrives and the ground warms up, well, the snow melts and everything like that, and it can't seep into the ground, so it floods. and it floods every year. Like this is this big news story. They do this every year, like it's a news story. It's like it happens every year. It's not like it's like when we have tornadoes in the Midwest. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened to me. Third time. Well, yeah, because it's where you are. This is what geography does. This is some of the limitations that geography has. I mean, there are. I mean, along with that, and then in the summer, it's searing hot. It gets up to 100 degrees or more in these prairie places. Because it's like, and you die. It's just miserable, man. It's a very tough life. It takes a very certain individual to be able to handle that. I'm not that person. I know that. So yeah, it's very harsh climate in that sense. Okay. So then we move along, and as it happens in the U.S., we have Rocky Mountains in the U.S. They have Rockies. They have the Canadian Rocky Mountains go up through Alberta, and then they have the coastal mountains. They kind of join up here along the west coast. You sort of like see that happens right through now over here. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, they have mountain ranges there. Very scenic, very beautiful. And also in that area, they also have discovered oil, or they discovered oil about 70 years ago in Alberta. And I mean, when they discovered it, I mean they found a ton of it. A ton of it. It has propelled the economy of Alberta and also Canada writ large for much of the last 70 years. In fact, when you have a Canadian dollar, the Canadian dollar compared to the US dollar, it rises, it falls. A lot of the times, the Canadian dollar rises based on whether or not oil prices are high. If oil prices are high, typically Canadian dollar follows. When oil prices dip, or for whatever reason they drop, demand has dropped for oil, like it did a few years ago, all of a sudden Canadian dollar, it drops as well. So I mean, these are really important elements. So you're heading west, going through the Rockies, going through Alberta. That just leaves British Columbia. British Columbia is on the west coast here, right? The British Columbia on the west coast, or they call it Lotus Land out there. British Columbians are like Californians of the north, if you will. They have a free-spirited, I don't know if it's attitude, but I mean the reputation is that they're a free-spirited bunch. And if you talk with people in Vancouver, they love living in BC because they've got the ocean on one side, they've got the mountains on the other, and it really is beautiful. It has a different kind of climate than you'll find in the rest of Canada. It is a climate you would find more in Great Britain, like they don't have a lot of snow. Remember a few years ago they hosted the Winter Olympics? Vancouver hosted the Winter Olympics. And it basically rained all the time because it doesn't get that cold in Vancouver. It very rarely gets below freezing. They had to have all the events where, the Nordic events, the skiing and the cross-country skiing and everything like that in a place called Whistler, which is in the mountains to the east of Vancouver. So, a couple hours away, because otherwise it's not happening. And I don't know, that's the thing they do with the Olympics lately. What was it? The last one were in Sochi in 2014 or whatever it was. There's someplace else too this year. I didn't really pay attention this year. Sorry. Anyways, you're going to places that really shouldn't be having Winter Olympics because they don't have friggin' winter there. And Vancouver really doesn't have what most Canadians would consider winter. It doesn't get hardly any snow at all, and it very rarely gets below freezing. So it's kind of like Great British thing. And actually the capital of British Columbia is Victoria, named after the Queen of same name from Great Britain era. And also, if you ever go to Victoria, people will tell you it's more British than England is. So they've adapted a lot of the attitudes and a lot of the customs that they have in Great Britain. Okay, and so it's a very different type of climate out there, which means it's a temperate climate, and once you get inside, once you go just a little bit east and south of those mountains, east of Vancouver, they actually have a dry area where it's kind of like semi-arid. It's probably the nicest, it's a small little patch of British Columbia, and that's probably the nicest weather you'll find in all of Canada, because it does get warm. It typically gets above, like 30 degrees Celsius or 85 Fahrenheit. So in the summertime, it's nice. It doesn't get cold in the winter. It's not that bad a place, but it's not that big a place either. So British Columbia, also on the west coast. Again, forestry is a major component of it, as is fishing. Salmon fisheries are very big out there as well. Again, depending on climate and other issues as well, it's a difficult row to keep things of that nature to go, because as we've seen, as you'll discover later on, we'll discuss it, the fisheries in the maritime provinces are struggling to survive. They've been overfished. They've been allowed to be overfished by various Canadian governments, and also other countries would come in, fish illegally, and essentially, basically, they fish all the fish away. They're still there. There still is some fishing going on, but the season is so abbreviated now, especially on the East Coast. The West Coast, they're trying to manage it a little bit better because they've tried to learn from what happened on the East Coast. But on the East Coast, if you're working 10 weeks a year in the fishing industry, you qualify, at one point you were able to qualify for unemployment insurance for the remaining 42 weeks of the year. That's how bad the fisheries were depleted. Okay. So again, you have mountains, and so you have fisheries and the timber, and so you have a basis across Canada. Okay. Now we'll get to the far north just very briefly, because far north takes up a vast part of it. This is Greenland over here, by the way, which strangely not green, but this part is. Anyways, the north up here. It's a very sparsely populated area. It's the largest. These are 3 territories we have up here. Yukon, you have Northwest, and Nunavut, which is a new territory they added in 1999. So basically it takes it from just south of Santa's workshop all the way down to below the Arctic Circle. And there is some activity up there, economic activity. Of course, you can't grow anything there. I mean, you can't. You can't. Maybe if global warming does kick in, you might be able to grow something, but even still, no, you can't. It'll be forever if that happens. If you can start growing stuff up there, there won't be anything else left to the rest of us, let's put it that way. It is brutally cold. I mean, I have a friend up there in Iqaluit, which is over here in Baffin Island, since it's part of right here. And right now, it's first, was not even in September yet, and typically the high temperature during the course of a day might be in the low 40s. Okay, at night it gets down to close to freezing, and my friend Pete was telling me last year they had their first snowstorm the last day of September, and they winter did not end until almost the 1st of June this year. And he means winter, and strangely, they don't get a lot of snow. They get some snow, but mostly whatever they get, they keep because it's so cold. And typically when I say cold, I mean like minus 25 to minus 30 during the course of the winter. Being the average temperature during the day might get to minus 15. At night it might drop down to minus 45 or so, somewhere in that area. So you're talking, pretty harsh conditions. I mean, you have to be fairly hardy to be doing that. And they do have a few industries up there. A lot of it to do with mining. There is some silver mining up there. There is some gold mining up there. There are also some diamonds. But again, these mines open and close based on the demand for the product around the world. So if gold is very high, then they run the mines. If the price of gold drops down, it's like, we'll close it until it comes back up. So it's not a stable source. And of course, traveling this far north, where you don't have any food, means you have to import all of it. And oh, by the way, you know what else you don't have up there? Roads. You don't have roads. There's no trucks. Ice road truckers don't go this far. They don't go this far. It's like they have to fly everything in. So it's not, I mean, it's fairly extreme, but I mean, milk, it can cost, $8 a gallon. It can be, $9 for a head of lettuce, during the rough season and stuff like that. And that's, of course, assuming the planes can get in. They always have to make sure there's more than enough food, because sometimes it's too cold to fly the planes. And they've adapted them pretty well now to fly in almost all weather, but sometimes you get blizzards and you just can't fly, period. So they have to make sure they have a little stable thing. And so you have to be very hardy to want to be involved in this. So this is sort of like the overall geography of Canada, I hope this is just a thumbnail sketch of what's available. This is this is considered the physical geography. The political geography is when we start getting lines on the map, okay? This area is going to be the province of New Brunswick. This area is the province of Manitoba. This city is the capital of Saskatchewan, Regina. So until Europeans come along, there are no lines, there are no borders, and it takes a while for that all to flesh itself out, and that takes time. And that's what we'll be talking about in the political geography bit, okay? So continue with your readings, continue to post on your discussion forums. I've had some questions on there for this topic as well. And also there's a written assignment that'll be due, we'll be discussing geography for 1 week, so that Sunday, a week from this coming Sunday, we'll be expecting one. After that, it'll be every 2 weeks, okay? But this will be the first graded written assignment on Canadian geography. Okay, hopefully that helps clarify things. I know that was a lot of information done in a very quick manner. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and don't hesitate to do so, okay? You know who I am. You gotta at least have a picture of, you have a graphic of who I am. So if you see me on campus and it's like, oh, that's you, I have you for a professor, that's okay to say, hey, you're my professor, because to me right now, all you are is a name and a few sentences on a online forum. So feel free to introduce yourself, okay? I think that's all I've got for now. All right, so I'll let you go. Enjoy Labor Day, even though we have class. Anyways, take care, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.